Where to Hunt podcast. Where to Hunt podcast. It's okay.
Hi, I'm Dan Small, host of Outdoor Wisconsin, and I listen to Where to Hunt.
It's okay.
I'm Kurt Geyer with Working Class Bow Hunter. I listen to Where to Hunt podcast, and it's decent.
It's all right.
Hey, this is Bud Fisher with Catching Deers, and I think the Where to Hunt podcast is all right.
Hey there, hi there, ho there. Howdy.
Howdy.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Where to Hunt podcast, the podcast that connects public land hunting enthusiasts. Today is September 1st.
It is.
This is the okayest podcast in the Midwest. Coming at you from the Okayest Hunter podcast studio. If you don't know who the Okayest Hunter is, it's all of us. We're all Okayest Hunters.
I'm okay with it.
Go to okayesthunter.com, enter in code W2H podcast, save yourself 10%, and know that when you buy something, it goes to 2% for conservation back into our public lands, and we volunteer some time over there too, to our public lands. It's pretty neat. Pretty neat stuff. It's pretty okay.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. What's up, Greg? How you doing?
I'm all right. How about you?
Backward hat day today, I guess.
I guess it is.
I copied you. You got a haircut, though, I noticed.
Yeah.
I trimmed up my beard a little bit.
Attaboy.
My wife was like, don't do it. And then she didn't even notice. I was like, pfft, didn't even notice.
I noticed right away. What happened to your face?
You got a good beard, though. You're just like, feels nice. I don't know how you get on your neck without it itching like crazy. I can't do
See,
it.
there's a certain point you get past that itchy threshold and you just let it go.
Feels like a turtleneck.
Just let it go, man.
Oh, God. In the hot summer, it's just like all
Yeah, it keeps mosquitoes off.
bullshit. It attracts
Does?
them.
No. Does not attract
You're
them.
just trying to mess with me.
I'm messing with you.
It's like the mosquito magnet. The dog is barking about something out there. Sorry, Ryan Nelson. Today we're doing Oktoberfest. I don't know. We got to get some more scotch in here. I'm out. We got the bourbon. I just figured. Trying to save it.
This is the celebratory swallow of Drop Tine Spirits.
Yeah.
This is it right here.
Yeah.
For the year. First buck gets it.
I got to buy a new bottle. We're not going to make it that far. Let's play some ads here.
Wake up and smell the coffee. Backwoods grind coffee, that is. Now, this ain't your fancy schmancy city boy coffee. This is what your grandpappy used to drink. And lucky enough for you loaf-around slack asses, they got a subscription service. Deliver any of their 6 blends right to your door, even a sampler. I like the Fireside blend, nice and dark. But they got something to suit every one of your tastes, light to dark and everything in between. Backwoods grind coffee for those who work hard and play harder. Take a look at your feet. Are you wearing Gumleaf USA boots? If you said no, you gotta reevaluate some things. Each pair is handmade and tested to take over 1 million flexes. These boots will take just about anything you can throw at them. Use promo code W2H2020 for 10% off your final purchase at gumleafusa.com.
You should take a drink of that bottle.
Yeah, I don't know about that. We do have a guest on the line with us. Let me get him unmuted here. We got... what? Oh, yeah, we got to do some more stuff. Bill, hang out with us for a second longer. So we got one more ad to do, and I forgot the discount code
Christmas
for Backwoods Grind. Dude, told you, it doesn't feel like Tuesday.
Well, spit it out here. Hurry up.
Backwoodsgrind.com. Enter in code W2H podcast for 10% off your order. You can do a subscription. You can do a sample bag. You can do a big bag, whatever you want. It's good stuff. I know the ad says they like Fireside because it's cool to say, but I actually like the Camp House.
Camp House is delicious.
And Vector gets double dose because we do the shot of the week.
Well, I'll make it short but
All
sweet. Right. VectorCustomShop.com. If you're looking for a set of custom-built arrows to your spec, look no further. Go to VectorCustomShop.com. You can order a sample pack, basically 2 arrows built to your liking. test them out. Whatever flies best for you. You can go with a half dozen or a dozen. And when you check out, enter code WHERE to hunt, and it'll save you 10% off. There it is.
Boom shakalaka.
Boom shakalaka.
Cool.
Who's our guest?
Hey, Bill. We got Bill Thompson on the line with us with Spart Forge. And you've been making your rounds on the podcast. We're happy that you took a stop here at the Okayest Hunter podcast, Bill.
Well, I'm glad you guys have me on. I like it so far.
Oh, yeah? Though we set the bar pretty low,
Good-
so you can like...
Good and informal. That's how I like it. I don't feel numb at all.
You can swear, you can drink, you can, totally mess up. And don't worry, we're not going to edit out the goof ups either. So you're stuck with whatever you put out here.
Well, I am drinking, and I haven't swore yet, but we'll see how the night goes.
All right. Well, that means we're not having fun yet then. We'll get you going. So tell the audience a little bit about you, some of your background, and then we'll start to get into what you're working on.
So right now I'm an active duty military warrant officer. I've been in the military for about 20 years. Joined when I was 17, and I've been doing basically intelligence work for the military for the better part of my life. Like I said, I was 17 when I joined. I'm 37 now. I've been doing it for about 20 years. And right now I'm getting ready to transition out of the military. I retire in April. And for the past 10 years or so, I've been working on this company, Spart Forge, that we're talking about today. We're an artificial intelligence company. And when I retire in April, I'm hoping this will be what I'm doing full time.
How's that looking so far? What is the horizon kind of, think it'll be a pretty smooth transition? Or if you're retiring, that's kind of nice from an income standpoint, but yeah.
Yeah, it's looking good so far. We got the app coming out later this month. We have some exciting news I can't share quite yet on the horizon for some stuff that we're doing, and it's gonna be good, I think.
It's exciting. I know you and I've had a few different conversations offline. I've gotten to hear your story. I am obsessed with what you're working on. I think it's fantastic. So, there's a lot of places I think this conversation can go, and we're going to let it just kind of go where it wants to go. I might guide it here and there because there's some certain points I want to tease out of you for our audience, but maybe tell folks, like, what is, when you say AI, what is it you're doing? What is it that they can expect of this thing once it gets into the App Store?
So when I say AI, artificial intelligence, sometimes it can throw people off, or people can automatically look away whenever you start talking about these things. But really, it's a moniker, it's a name, and what it means is a high-level pattern analysis. That's the best way to describe it. It's basically taking tons and tons of different types of data and making sense of them and cleaning them and then presenting them, or extracting analysis from them to make sense, for whatever your goal is. So just tons of different types of data, and we're talking terabytes and terabytes of data, more data than any human could look at. We're extracting all of the meaningful lessons from that data, and then we're applying it to a future situation that hasn't taken place. It's really the best way to frame what artificial intelligence is.
And are you able to, I don't want to step out of bounds here with I don't want you to give away the secrets or anything, but are you in a place where you can say where you got some of the data from and kind of how you arrived at?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Because I think that's what makes it really fascinating. I think that's what you have that, I don't know that anybody else has it at all, right? And it would not be easy for anyone else to get that stuff. So you kind of got it cornered right now, I think.
Yeah, for the time being, I think so. It's been about 4 going on 5 years of really data gathering. Any effective machine learning situation or artificial intelligence product takes droves and droves and droves of data. And that's really kind of the value of a machine learning or artificial intelligence company, is the data that they sit on. So when we first started training, our data was mostly publicly available state studies, biology studies on white-tailed deer, car collision data from insurance companies that were willing to share what they had, which, USA, State Farm were a couple of bigger ones that really worked with us a lot. And then collared deer data, I guess, is the biggest one, which was the most difficult one to get. And collared deer data is basically, a biologist at a university or at a state agency is doing a study. They have questions about the deer population, and there are so many crazy studies out there where they're studying, you wouldn't even think to study some of the things that they study with deer. They study them, they collar these deer for, sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's a year. We have studies where there's as much as 7 years of data, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, millions of data points on the collar GPS side. And I basically got that by Googling studies online and Google Scholar and other places, and contacting the DNR repository, the person who's holding onto the data, or the people who did the study, having conversations with them, kind of saying, hey, here's what we're doing now. Here's how we can help you guys if you help us by giving us the data. And that's really been the relationship with the majority of these places. And I did a count the other day. It's probably out of date now because I've probably sent a few hundred emails since then. But I was on the order of about 2,000 emails that I had sent to people who had done wildlife GPS studies. Now, mind you, on some of these studies, there'd be 7 authors, and I would email every one of them and say, hey, here's what I'm doing, and here's how we can help each other out. And a lot of the people understood the value that they can get from artificial intelligence and machine learning and give the data up. And we were able to compare that data up to other places and then tell them, the differences between their deer and other deer, and extrapolate some meaningful data that they might not have otherwise seen. And that's helped them be efficient with their money, because all of these studies cost money. So those are some of the ways that we were getting this data. And I did that for 8 years, I would suppose, before we were ever able to make a machine learning, to conduct any machine learning to enable our artificial intelligence. So it's been a long time coming, and it certainly has not been easy.
So were they pretty willing to help you out with this then?
Yeah, so there's two. So with the first sets of data, those were all publicly available and publicly online. So the QDMA studies, the State Wildlife Agency studies, those are published and available online, and I was able to get that data. And with the car collision data, like I said, I got data from USAA and I got data from State Farm. And a lot of it was data that they already send out there to their consumers anyway. It's just I was able to get it in all one email. With the biologists, I'd say, I don't know. I guess if I had to pick a number, I'd say about 10 or 15% of them were willing to share the data. A lot of them thought, it's really cool what you're doing, but, we're doing our own movement-related studies right now, and we can't, share that data. I don't know if they thought we were sharing studies or whatever, but yeah, about 10 to 15% of them were willing to do it. Out of the thousands of emails that I sent, which actually, and the ones who were able to do it were sitting on lots of data from lots of places. So, we were able to get a very large catalog of data.
Wow.
Answer your question there, Greg?
Sure.
It is fascinating.
I don't come up with many, but when I do.
Yeah, no. It's interesting because a lot of the stuff, like you said, is public information, right? We're taxpayers, and these are public entities like the Wisconsin DNR.
Yep.
So what is available is available. But how you go about getting it, or, gaining some of that permission or access, obviously having a conversation with some of those folks is smart, right? And if you can help them too, then they're more willing, or maybe they have it packaged a different way or whatever makes life a little easier for everybody. It's cool, man. Yeah.
I should also mention that there are places out there that host this data for free and make it publicly available for people. We were able to get some of that data. It's kind of funny. The majority of that data was Canadian, and then some of it was Southern data. I've mentioned it before, but I think Canadians have a mandate to publish a lot of this information. So that really helped us with northern deer, because there aren't as many northern studies as you'd like to see. There are northeast deer studies, happening quite a bit. The south is by far the most that are out there.
And when you say south, are you referring to like Texas or like Florida, or where is that coming from?
Texas, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina. All of the guys that I ran into down there were really, eager to learn from their data, because like I said, they pay for these studies to take place, and they're often pretty spendy, and they take a long time. So it's prudent for them to try to get as much data as they can from the study. And a lot of times this data has just been sitting around for 3 or 4 years. We got a fair amount of data from the Northeast, but for some reason, just up there, I don't know if it's like I don't know. They say live on the East Coast before you get too hard and live on the West Coast before you get too soft. A lot of those guys up there were hard nuts to crack. The data that we did get was good enough to train our model, and we got enough up there, but we're always looking for more. So it's kind of like one of those cultural things. The South, everybody's just willing to share the data and happy to do it and happy to learn from it. And it wasn't quite the case up in the Northeast, but we did get enough and make enough relationships up there to get the model to predict quite well.
So you have collision data, collar deer data, weather data. Those are some of the key ones, right, that you're kind of weighing in. And then you said, is it terrain also?
Yeah, so terrain data we get from a number of sources, and we've kind of compiled that together into our own unique data set. We're using that for analysis right now. And then we also get the state agency data from I think one of the things I've neglected to say on some of the other podcasts, or maybe I have said it, but not, said it enough, is we've got every peak conception data point for every county in the U.S., and then every secondary peak conception point, roughly it's 28 days later. So you can just kind of add that to the calendar if you have the first one.
And
But
for the layperson,
county-
what's a peak conception point? I'm the layperson.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
What's a peak conception point?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so during phases of the rut, there's actually when the does are what they're called standing does, and that basically means they're receptive to a buck for mating.
They're in estrus,
A lot of guys
Eric.
call that. Yeah, they're in estrus. Well, they come into estrus earlier than that, but then they're actually willing to stand for a buck and mate. That's the conception. And then what biologists do is when does are killed, they will measure the fawns in utero and then come up with a date of when the conception must have happened. And they do this for most places in the U.S. So when you understand that, you understand when the majority of does are in estrus, and then scientifically you can backdate that and then find out in your specific county when you should start seeing seeking and chasing behavior, which is what everyone refers to as the rut, when actually it's the seeking and chasing phase of the rut. But that's what most people are interested in. So we've got that for every county in the U.S. with the exception of maybe 10 or 15.
Wow.
I mean, you said you've been at it for 5 years, kind of building out this data and just kind of, working in silence, so to speak, and you're finally letting the cat out of the bag. I mean, like I said, there's a couple places I want to take this conversation, but I want to make sure you get to say everything that you want to say too. So what are, I guess, from a product standpoint for like the users, the hunters that are going to use this, what is the offering for them? Like, how are they going to be able to engage with this product? And just to clarify, my understanding is that this isn't going to help you find like a mature buck, so to speak, and tell you like hunt Tuesday at 5 o'clock and you're going to see this 12 pointer. It's more like, look, here's where the odds are most in your favor to see a deer on hoof, right? And here's how it might, negotiate this terrain or what have you. So with that, I'll let you kind of answer the first question and I'll stop talking.
Yeah, so I guess the offering is, we have 2 phases to the offering. The first phase is we're answering the question of when, which is when will deer be moving, and what our machine intelligence or artificial intelligence has done is it's understood the general patterns of the general deer. So that is to say, as you said, not the specific deer, but the general deer. So we have a very good we know what are the conditions that the general deer moves under regionally, because they do differ from the north to the south to the northeast. There are different things, different temperatures, different wind conditions, different rain conditions that will allow you to see a deer on the hoof. And basically, the decision for the deer is are the weather or environmental factors present to make me risk my neck to get on the hoof during daylight? In other words, is there a weather event happening? Is there pressure building from does coming into estrus and mating, fighting for mating rights? Is the winter setting in and you're going to have to get as much fat on your body? There's a variety of things that will get a deer on the hoof during daylight hours. And what our artificial intelligence has done is with very high accuracy. Right now we're north of 65%. Is able to tell the hunter when the general deer will start moving. When I say 65%, what I mean by that is, as we ingest new GPS data, which we're doing continuously, we're about to get some more tomorrow or the next day, we're able to test our model. So we have, 35 or 40 deer get collared, and they are out for 3 years. And we understand when there's peaks and, ebbs and flows and movement. We document all of those things on the GPS, and then we give that same set of days to our artificial intelligence, and we say, hey AI, on what days do you think the deer are going to be moving most? And then we compare that and see where we were right and where we were wrong before we use that data to train our model. And right now we're consistently north of 65%.
Oh wow!
On predicting when deer are going to be moving in the woods. And then the second offering, which will be later in this year, probably for the general public into next year, is basically going to be where. So extrapolating or taking the data from those same data points and saying, okay, now I understand when the deer are going to be moving. Here's the property that I'm going to be hunting. Generally, where will they be moving here? And then where should I be looking for specific types of activity that I can put on the map and then help update my general intelligence and make it more specific to your property. But yeah, what we're releasing right now is the win part, which is, later this month.
That's incredible. I mean, it's either going to affirm some things that you believe, or it's going to tell you some other things that I didn't consider this, or is that really what the data is telling me? Like, and as, an experienced hunter, you can do something with that. As someone that's more like me, an okayest hunter, well, you can really promote yourself up to okayer hunter, I suppose. It's super fascinating. What I think, what I wanted to get out of this a little bit more is like, in your seat, having been looking at this data for so many years and having so much of it, you've mentioned some things to me offline about like, you've had some preconceived notions and beliefs that were really strong in favor of X, Y, Z. And then you've been looking at this data and you're like, well, wait a second. I never would have considered this, or I wouldn't have thought I would believe that. How many of those things do you have in your back pocket now? And if we're talking about like the subject of this podcast today is like, hunting deer from a data-driven approach, I mean, it's not a thing that you can do currently without your product. So what are some of the early learnings that you've had that have kind of turned you on your head a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I'm talking about, and then there's a few more that I really don't talk about that much because it kind of gives away the secret sauce. Or I shouldn't say gives it away, but it would allow other models to become a lot more accurate in places in ways that they're not very accurate right now. So, but the things that I will talk about that I think are interesting is, when I came to the table doing this type of analysis, I was always under the idea that I was a moon phase believer, I guess is the best way to put it. I thought the moon had a heavy impact on whitetail deer movement because the way that I was, first brought up when I was hunting as a younger man and the books that I was reading. And then some of the people who I, followed their career trajectories and watched them grow as hunters, they were all, moon guys as well. And with the exception of, I guess, with the way that the full moon affects illumination, it can affect deer moving in the morning, and that, you won't see as much movement in the late morning, and then you'll probably see next to no movement that afternoon. That's kind of been out there. People have been talking about that. That's kind of one of the things that the data has bared out. And I guess the interesting point of contact there is, and the reason why I think it's an illumination detail is because when there's an exceptional amount of cloud cover on the night of the full moon, we don't see those trends take place. In other words, I don't think it's one of those things where the moon affects the tides and people think, oh, the crazy people are out on, the full moon night, bank robberies. I think I've read these stats about like bank robberies go up during the full moon because of the, gravitational pull, where we do see it affecting things like the ocean's waves. I haven't been able to get it to affect any, or to see anything in the data that would say, as I said before, our model is an artificial intelligence model. So it's mimicking the way that a deer thinks. So our approach is very data-driven in that no presuppositions come to the table, in that if the data isn't doing it, if the deer aren't doing it, then our model won't predict for it.
Yeah, there's no bad habits it's bringing along with it, right? It's like starting fresh completely. and then learning from only the data that you have, which is beautiful, really.
Yeah, and what it's not doing is we're not seeing a correlation with necessarily moon phase, but more or less with the illumination that a full moon will provide during the night, allows them to feed more aggressively, and that's kind of been the effect that we see so far. Now, that is to say, with these rules of thumb, it could be I ingest 2,000 more deer in the next year, and then we start seeing that. So the second part there is that we're not static. We're always learning more things. But right now we've got a very good model that predicts very well. And currently the thing that we are getting out of moon phase is illumination.
That's cool. I guess I didn't, it makes sense as you explained it, but I wouldn't have considered it. Like I know, did I? Oh yeah. I went salmon fishing on Lake Michigan and it was a full moon. And then so we got there in the morning and like the charter captain's like, oh hell, it's going to be a shit day out there. It's been a damn full moon. And we're like, wait, what? Why is that bad? He's like, because the fish could see they were feeding all night. They're not going to be hungry for what we're throwing. I'm like, oh, well, geez, I didn't even consider that. We actually did pretty good still, but it took a while. And they weren't on in the morning at all.
No, they were on probably later on towards the end of your charter trip, middle of the day. And that's kind of how it works with deer too, is they'll get up and move middle of the day a little bit more, and then they'll chillax for a little bit.
Yeah, it makes sense. If they have light and they can see better, or there's things are illuminated, right? Maybe they can see predation from further away or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they're going to take advantage of that, like a human would. Right? I can see. I'm going to travel more tonight. Right. It makes sense. But that's cool. That's interesting that full moon all by itself. Yeah, so far is what you're telling us. Like the data hasn't proven this out just yet necessarily, but what you have, it sounds like it really is illumination based.
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. I don't mean if you don't want to share other nuggets.
I have a couple more I can talk about.
Okay, good.
If you want me to talk about them,
I would love that.
Please do.
As our season's 12 days away, the more you can feed us here, the more value it's going to be, and then it'll put a lot of value into when you start to launch stuff.
Yeah, I guess one of the good things for southern hunters is that rain has has the opposite effect on deer that I thought it would have. When we came to this data, my growing up hunting in the north, and then as an adult hunting on the East Coast, I always thought, if it's raining, it's no good for deer hunting. And as we ingest data in the South, and we're looking at deer from Texas to South Carolina to Georgia to Florida, we actually find that during periods of light rain and periods of medium to medium heavy, but not heavy, but medium to medium heavy rain, we are seeing heightened periods of movement, more so than they are moving generally. And that was kind of another presupposition for me that kind of blew us away when we started looking at this stuff, is that deer seem to be moving more. And I have some theories on this, but I'm not a whitetail deer biologist. I've talked to some about it, and they have theories as well. But certainly for your southern listeners, if it's light rain to medium rain and they're down south, they should not be on the couch if they're serious about putting a buck on the wall.
What are your thoughts on that, Greg, as the more expert hunter in the room?
No, I'm not gonna confirm or deny that that's one. I'm not an expert, so, but I mean, I've seen my share of movement with weather. The night I killed my buck that was predicted to rain, but it didn't. Surprisingly, I went anyway. The last buck that I killed with a bow. I've been in the stand with a bit of rain and harvested deer. It definitely got them moving more. And just because of the area I was hunting, it was conducive to harvesting a doe. And I saw plenty of does and harvested them. So I'm not afraid to hunt in the rain, that's for sure, especially if it's light to medium. Mm-hmm. Heavy sucks. But if it's just a short period of a downpour and you can manage it, I'd say manage it.
Well, I know a lot of things people say is like, if you hunt in the rain, you if you're bow hunting, right, you might not have a good blood trail because it'll wash it away or something like that. So there's concern there sometimes. But, I hunt the days that I can hunt. And if it's going to rain that day, I'm still hunting. It is what it is. And I might just sit there and suffer all damn day. But, I I'm probably, unlucky enough on other ends of the spectrum either, where I haven't been able to rule out rain as a good or a bad thing for me just yet. But if that's the day that I have to hunt and it's raining, I don't give a shit. But if that means like deer might be more likely to move, that's good to hear.
Well, in the majority of places I'm hunting too, I'm hunting near water or over water. Yep. It's all swamp and marsh.
Right.
I think one of the interesting things too, and you just kind of said it there before, you said whether or not it's raining or not, if it's my day to hunt, I'm still hunting. And really that's how people should be using our when prediction as well, in that a user can just pick the days that, if our prediction system is saying very high movement or high movement, and so there's two axes that we predict against. The first one is, low, right now it's low to high movement, but pretty soon it's probably becoming from very low to very high movement. And then the second one is pattern. And that is, are they in pattern? Are they out of pattern? Or can you just throw pattern out the window, or kind of like a 3 measurements? So on those days where our system might be saying very low movement, I would just say on those days, if you're still going to hunt, just don't hunt, your spots that you've scouted out or your best stands. Maybe lay off some more and hunt places where deer expect to smell you, and it's not going to throw them off. But if you were using our model, I would say the day to get aggressive, or if you scouted some public land where there's good bedding, I would say save those types of stands or that stand selection for the very high movement days, because you're much more likely, statistically speaking, to see that buck getting on the hoof and risking his neck earlier in the day than you otherwise would, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. That's a really good way. I mean, that's kind of similar to like if you have private property, like a lot of people don't want to burn it, right? They want to hold on to it. And I've talked to a number of folks that'll hunt public land and then save their private land for the days when they know that it's going to be good or what have you. So that's interesting. It's almost like using your app. If I were using it on public land, I would say, oh, well, maybe this particular plot with this likelihood of when and where, maybe I will hold off until a better day, right? And maybe I'll hunt a state park or something, or a county park where I know there's a lot of people traffic and human scent. So then it's not as big of a deal.
Right.
That's cool. You said you had like one more?
As far as movement's concerned, I mean, those are kind of like the two that I talk about the most. I guess the other one would be that I'm fine with talking about is, people often say if there's a storm coming, especially north, I kind of categorize it as north of the Mason-Dixon line. If there is movement, if they're cataloging or looking at movement before a storm happens, a lot of people say, get out before a storm happens, like that's going to be the best time. I would say most of the time it's best to get out right after a storm leaves. And when we're seeing tons of favorable movement conditions before a storm is generally when there's been like a peppering of storms leading up to it. In other words, understanding favorable feeding days coming up to a storm front moving in and that pressure drop becomes a better proposition for that prior to the storm hunt day, when there's been a number of these days lined up, 10 days prior, because then there's in the north, that is not in the south, there's more movement happening right before that storm. And then depending on the length of the storm, you'll see an even greater amount of movement afterwards, if that makes sense.
It does. So the fun thing to consider, you had mentioned a little bit ago that like you've kind of bounced some of these things off of wildlife or big game ecologists or biologists, et cetera. I think it'd be interesting, to understand the why behind that. So like, here's what the data is telling us, true, false, whatever. Let's just assume everything's true because the data is awesome. You have millions of data points over, terabytes of data, et cetera, over countless years. But like, why is that? Like that's where I think this is a fun conversation, because why are the deer moving after a storm than before? And some of the more experienced hunters might know exactly what's going on, but there's a lot of us that don't have a clue. We always try to think about like, well, why did I see the deer that day? Why did he come from that direction? We try to ask ourselves why all the time to understand this stuff. It feels like after a storm, it's natural to emerge from something and like, okay, it's calm. I've been hunkered down. I can poke around now, right? Like that seems to be a why, but I wonder what a biologist might have to say about it.
Yeah, and that's really, if they're a biologist listening and they want to answer those questions about their data, they're free to send it off to us, and we'll tell them everything we can about it, because that's kind of one of the other things that we're doing is trying to help people understand the regional differences in how deer move and how they elect to move, because those differences are certainly there, and those differences are even there. Cross county will ingest data, especially in the south, not so much in the north. In the north, the general deer is pretty similar, talking from North Dakota down in Nebraska, across to New York, up to Connecticut. There's a lot more similarity there. When you start getting south of the Mason-Dixon, and you start talking about how deer were stalked in those areas back in the day, or you start talking about how drainage affects movement and peak conception dates and fawning periods, there's a lot more diversity in that data, and I think that's where a lot of the strength is.
Because then your system can learn more from that, measure more data points
Precisely.
or whatever. Yeah, that's cool.
And you kind of said it before, but I think it's worth saying again is the data doesn't produce a result or predict for a result unless we have produced a bell curve of movement based on that result. And I guess the way to say that is not that we're great and that our system's the best. It's basically that our system's based in data, and the data can't lie, because literally hundreds of thousands of deer need to be doing things based on weather and topography conditions in order for our system to recognize it and project it on a forecast. So these nuances that you talked about, I think it would be interesting to start getting some of the whys of these answered. And I have found studies where people are trying to answer it, but I also don't think that anybody's compiled this much deer GPS movement, collision movement, and white-tailed studies to kind of look at this thing with kind of what I would call a God's eye view.
I feel like, man, my business mind is, every time I talk to you, my gears just start going really fast. I feel like insurance companies would be all over this too, right? But I guess if you're getting that data from them, whatever, maybe you can predict more of like, oh, well, they're going to cross the highway in this spot. I guess we kind of already know that information because deer crossing signs, right? I don't know who decides where those damn things go.
Yeah, actually, we do plan on engaging with these guys in the future, because I think there is tons for people to learn here, and to start making these models preemptive for the motorist is prudent. I think it's good, and it's another useful way to use this data. I'm not sure that any of them are doing this right now, because I'm thinking that a business-minded individual wouldn't share the kind of data that these insurance organizations have shared with me if they were doing this type of work. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's why it's fascinating. But, oddly enough, to bring us back into Deerland, like, collision data as a driver is one of the best indicators of, oh my God, it's the rut. I saw 10 dead deer today. Like Greg and I, back when there wasn't COVID and we were both driving to work every single day, we would call each other nonstop. Did you see the buck on Highway 16 bypass on the east side? Did you see the one on the west side? Oh my God! Like that's what's going on between deer hunters. Come not a month, 2 months from now. So that's a pretty good piece of data to really have inform your stuff. Really.
Yeah, I think it would be useful. One of the things that I've thought about is like in a Google Maps capacity or in like a Waze capacity, that when you're driving through like a state forest or something like that and you're on the way somewhere, like if you're entering a zone of high collision, like if there have been documented collisions here, and there are places like that where this happens, just like you get a notification to say you have a cop, there's a speed trap up ahead.
Yeah, the Waze app.
Having that to say, hey, people, keep your eyeballs open.
Stay frosty.
This is a place where, from October 15th to November 15th, you're very likely to see a deer crossing the road.
I mean, for us hunters, we're looking every field that we pass, like going off. We're our own worst problem, actually. Like my wife's like, "Well, you just watch the road, but there's a deer out there."
Yeah, we're a hazard to our own selves.
Yeah.
And anybody riding with us.
But there's a lot of people that aren't us that don't have a clue, right? They wouldn't think twice about looking at a deer, and we'd be drooling out of our mouth, and they couldn't care less. But they should know, right? There's a greater population of non-hunters that might leverage this data too for that perspective, but for us, like helping us figure out how to hone in on it, or like take that rutcation from work and plan those vacation days, like that's going to help a ton of people just by itself.
Yeah, I think it'll help them in that way, but I think it'll help a lot of people too. And just like myself, we all have bias when we approach the woods, how we think deer move. And when we have a system like ours where there's millions of data points and those data points can't lie by definition,
Yep.
it's important for it's an important part of growth as a hunter and a human to reflect on, truth, what we call truth data in artificial intelligence, and say, okay, how do I use this to update my own systems? Everyone can do this, from the novice hunter up to the expert hunter who's been in the woods for 50 years. Nobody has witnessed millions and millions of movement points, remembers them all, and then can account for them in an upcoming forecast.
Yeah, no, it's technology at the finest. And there's probably a whole other subtopic about like ethics of technology and hunting, and there's cell cams, and there's this, and there's the evolution of bows has gone from stick and string, and people used to make their own arrowheads and arrows and fletchings, to now crossbows are legal and blah blah blah, and a sight on a rifle can shoot 500 yards and all this stuff, right? So I think it's just another tool to increase our odds or have a better or more ethical shot, and I think it's a ton of fun, man. I mean, people used to nerd out on, like, I remember my dad would, and he's a listener, so he'll hear this in his truck like tomorrow or whenever he listens, but he would look at maps like obsessively. I mean, they'd be out on the kitchen table, maps of the Nicolet National Forest. We'd get up there, we'd be looking at maps, just maps. But it was fun to look at maps. It was like, let's look at the topo terrain. Where are the funnels? Where's the food? Where's the water? Like, where do we think they're going to be going? Where are we going to traverse in? Where's the logging road? Where the fuck are we? It was fun to do that. This has just kind of evolved a lot of part of what we like have fun with. Like, e-scouting used to be looking at a map on paper. It's still like the same route kind of thing. This is just taking it to another level. And at the end of the day, you still got to get time in the woods and have boots on the ground. You could still totally F up your shot, and miss.
Yep.
So yeah, does this stuff help you? Of course it does. But it's still only as good as the hunter to some degree.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not losing the arrow for anyone. They still got to get in the stand. They still have to hunt the appropriate amount of days. Like, this is not an end all be all. The comparison that I make for people is, this is just like getting somebody in your life who's been hunting for 50 years. Like, people have access to pro hunters and people on hunting staff and guys who've spent a lot of time in the deer woods, public or private, and have put a lot of deer on the ground. And what we are doing with this company is we're making that person accessible to everyone. And we're doing it for a cheap cost. So you don't have to spend $2,500, $3,500 to come out and have someone shape the deer woods for you, or tell you where to put your stands and what you should be, what kind of crops you should have, or doing an analysis, paying someone online to do an analysis of public lands. As technology evolves, so should the hunter. And what we're doing is we're just bringing these best practices and this data-driven model to people, because we all have vacation that we want to spend prudently, time with our family to make sure that they're not going crazy when we're out obsessively chasing deer. And the more time that we can, or the less time that we can spend scouting by, all of those poring over the maps that you and your father did, when you're using our second feature, our aware feature, it's going to cut that time down drastically, because we're going to only show you the places on that land where deer are going to be moving generally.
Yep.
And then we slow that analysis time down, and then we tell you, here are the best days to go in there, so that you're not wasting vacation time. And I think that it becomes an ethic everyone can get behind when we make this data available and cheap, and then we get more hunters involved. And the more hunters that we get involved, the more revenue is being generated, and the more people are voting for more public land and public land access. Because if we're not sharing this art, and if we're not getting as many people involved as possible, and we're not making as many people successful as possible, we're going to see our access to public land dwindle away. And that's my biggest fear. Right.
That is, and we have a similar fear. Like, I'd be remiss if I didn't say where to hunt. Like, we're in the app space too. We are on the opposite side of the coin currently, right? And I think the sky's the limit for you guys. But you're focused currently on deer movement, deer behavior, deer patterning, etc. And we've rolled our dice on the hunter side. How can I occupy other hunters, or how can I identify occupied and unoccupied hunting land based on where other hunters are? Again, from a timing standpoint, like, I, as an example, as a modern day hunter, have 2 kids under the age of 3 and a day job. I do this on the side, a couple other things, like a total crazy person. And when hunting season rolls around, I don't got a lot of time. So the last thing that I want to do when I get out there is bump into another hunter, because that's a bad use of both of our time. And I've just ensured that they're not going to see a deer. I'm not going to see a deer. We bumped into each other. How great would have been if we would have avoided one another, right? And I think a lot of the serious hunters, the expert guys out there, they put a lot of effort into, staying away from hunting pressure and leveraging that and maximizing that as much as they can to get to where the deer are, because, deer are deer, and you can use what you have, or you can make some basic assumptions on like, they're going to traverse this way, or this is where the food is, etc. But inevitably, I don't care how far you go back, you're going to find some boot tracks somewhere, right? It always happens, and it sucks when it happens when you have a stand on your back and you've picked out your tree and there's a guy in the tree, 2 trees over, whistling at you, not because you're attractive. It's like the warning call, right? Get away from me, I'm here already. So then you got to go trudge through more forest, and now you're on your plan B or C or unknown, and that's hard. So, it's really fun that there's someone else in this space that's trying to drive home this mission of like, let's make our public land safe and accessible, and like bring more people into the space, because God knows we need it. If people don't get into hunting, it might not be around for our kids. It's
right, exactly.
It's an interesting time to be doing some of this stuff. So I think what you're doing is just absolutely fantastic. I'm super excited for it to, get released and take off. I'll be, if you don't already have a first customer, like, I'll gladly raise my hand. I'll be the first one if you need, or whatever. But it sounds like you probably got people lined up outside the door already.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. We'll be happy to have you.
Well, with that, I planted the seed earlier on before we hit the record button. I'd love to hear your most memorable hunt.
Yes, you did hit that one. So this would have been Veterans Day of 2017, I believe. Maybe it was 2018. I can't remember now. 2017. It was 2017. I had been hunting around. It was a golf course that bumped up to public land, and I was hunting the public land side, but I was accessing it through the golf course. And the hunting on the golf course wasn't great, but what it did give me is it gave me a way to get onto this other part of public land where I wasn't, as you just talked about, screwing up everybody's hunt on the way through. And I knew this was an area where there was favorable buck bedding and favorable doe bedding, where I'd seen a lot of doe in the past. And it was November 11th in Maryland, which is about, I believe, 3 days after peak conception. I think peak conception there's the 7th or the 15th. I can't remember. I've done so many of these peak conception studies that I'm starting to forget the dates in my own area. At any rate, I'll be able to use my app to look that up. I was watching a scrape line that I could see. It kind of came up out of a creek in front of me, and there was a scrape right at the top of this where I'd say a lot of points came together. And then the buck, after they would work this scrape, I saw a lot of bucks working these scrapes. They would take one of the other, thoroughfares out where this hub came together where this main scrape was. And it was like a primary scrape. It was probably the size of a hood of a car. It was a large scrape, 2 or 3 licking branches over it. And I'd see some bucks earlier that morning, but the does, where the does bedded, was right off of this. And it kind of seemed like every buck in that area would come through. And I had some pictures of a larger buck that had just showed up a few days earlier. And it was a big buck. And so how I was positioned over this primary scrape, I could see the scrape line coming up to it from like 3 directions. There were 3 different scrape lines that bucks would work as they came into this. So it was just like a primo spot. And it was so far back on the public land that it was difficult to get to unless you were willing to do like a 3-mile hike, which a lot of people weren't doing. I don't think I'd ever seen anyone else back there. So got up in the stand that morning, saw a bunch of bucks coming through, a couple of cool ones. There's one that I'm glad I didn't take. He was probably like a 135-inch buck, and he was missing one eye. He'd been fighting and was missing an eye, and it was like scarred over. He looked really cool. It would have been an awesome buck to put on the wall, but I figured I'll just let him walk. And sure enough, probably I'd say around 9:15 a.m., I saw what at the time looked like a 200-inch deer. Which he was not that large, but working a scrape line coming up, and it felt like from I could see 3 of the scrapes that he was working. in what was realistically probably only, I don't know, 10 minutes of him working this scrape line, it felt like an hour. And when he got to the top, he had got under this primary scrape and into this oak tree and started working the biggest scrape. And that's when I drew back, because I knew when he had his head in these leaves, he wouldn't be able to see me. Loose the arrow and just like clean, silent pass through, like to the point where I thought I didn't hit him. And the buck just kind of dropped his head out of the tree and didn't run. He just looked around. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh man, I started to get another arrow out of the quiver because I thought somehow I had missed. It was only about a 22-yard shot. And then all of a sudden I saw a big blob of blood come right out of his side, right out of the boiler room. And he started to walk just slowly. So I took my phone out, and, you know, I can send you the video afterwards. I still have it on my phone. I took the phone out and measured and just watched him walk. He just kept walking. And probably 15 or 20 yards later after walking, he just fell over and died right there. It was like a double lunger that had just nicked at the top of the heart. And it all happened. It's the only buck I can remember where it looked like they had no idea what happened. He just kept walking forward. Like I said, didn't go more than 20 or 25 yards. He was on the ground and dead in like 10 minutes. And it was a good deer. It's my best public land deer.
Public land deer are all trophies. That one sounded like
Absolutely
a gangster of a deer. Like, I've been hit. Fuck, I'm just going to walk this off until I do, like, what?
I'm going to walk this off, right, exactly.
What a badass. Even if it wasn't like walking off to live, or he's like, this is my death walk, fuck it. Like, it's almost like he lit a cigarette. You know those YouTube videos where they like say gangster and then like the cigarette and glasses go on? Like, I want to do that to your video.
Well, I'll send it to you, and you can feel free to do that.
Holy cow. That's crazy.
That sounds a lot like my buck I shot in 2018. It hit him right in the boiler room. Again, like he's saying, top of the heart, through the lungs, hopped a few feet, turned around and looked and went, really? What was that about? And then sidestepped and fell over. It was, you make that shot and it's awesome.
Wow.
It's awesome.
Wow.
Super sharp broadhead, pass through shot. I mean, I don't think it gets any better than that.
That's cool. That'll be a good one for our memorable hunts for sure.
Absolutely.
I'll never forget it.
No, that's cool. I mean, everyone's got different stories, and that's one of my favorite things of doing the show. And so I don't know if you know, but we cut it up into like we film score to make it into a mini episodic. So you'll see that at some point. I don't know when, but it'll be out there at some point. It's cool. It'll sound way better. That's good stuff. Well, okay, let's bring the plane in for a landing. Tell people where they can find this stuff, when they can expect to use it, all of that, all the shameless plug stuff. Let's get people where they need to go here so they can find out more.
Yeah, so our website is www.spartanforge.ai, and we're making a couple changes right now, a couple things that we got to do. We have a few irons in the fire, and we're looking at the middle of the month. Of course, in the military, we have a saying, no plan survives first contact. In other words, you can have the best plan for how you're going to go to war, but as soon as the bullets start flying, it's not, everything's going to change. So yeah, www.spartanforge.ai. On there in the top right, I believe when you click on it, I can't remember, I think it's the top right, there's our Instagram and Facebook. So go on there and let us know what you think. Please like and share it. And, we'll be here probably around the middle of the month. I would say that we're going to be releasing our first product. And then towards the later part of the year, probably for our staff of, hunters that we're bringing on right now as we speak, we'll release that wear feature and start, kind of curating it and making changes, or if it, it's predicting incorrectly or something like that. It's probably the more tricky of the two artificial intelligences, but it's looking promising right now. So, there's a win right now. We're calling that Apollo. There's a wear that we're calling Artemis. Those two things probably be getting renamed here sometime soon, because everyone except for myself seems to be confusing the names. So
that's how it works.
Probably got a little too geeky when I came up with those names. I was just, thinking Spartan Forge, Apollo being the goddess of the hunt, and then Artemis being the god of war. I thought that sounded cool, but it seems to confuse people more than anything. So probably go with the when and where feature. And yeah, the when feature is gonna be very soon here. We'll release it on the website when it comes out, when it's ready. We're just we're basically ready right now. We're just putting on the spinning rims and the chrome detailing. But once that's all finished, it'll be out there this month for everyone to enjoy.
That's great. That reminds me, I don't know if you've read the book by Phil Knight, Shoe Dog. It's about Phil Knight's he's the former CEO of Nike, and Nike for like, I don't know, 7 or 10 years or somewhere in there was Blue Ribbon Sports. They were not Nike. And then when they were doing I think they were doing their IPO, their initial public offering, they had to come up with a different name. And so everyone pitched these ideas. And Phil Knight, the owner, wanted to call it Dimension 8. He thought that was like the shit. He's like, no, it's Dimension 8. And then, literally the last second on the phone with whoever they were doing the deal with, it was like, okay, we'll call it Nike, right? The Greek goddess of, I think it was like victory or something. So that's cool. It's funny that you understand the names, but no one else does. And like Phil Knight was like, no, Dimension 8 makes a ton of sense for all these reasons. That's a terrible name. Now, I'm not saying your names are terrible, but I'm just saying it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're a bunch of nerds. So I don't expect that we're going to be coming up with the most marketing savvy stuff. So we'll allow, the market, as any good company should do. We're going to allow the market to drive where we go.
Exactly.
And I think these first two things are going to be, I think it's going to help change the game for people.
That's super cool. And you know what? The market's the market, right? So, as long as you got the chops from a product standpoint to back up everything you're doing, the name doesn't matter, right? It will matter when it matters. Nike didn't matter until it mattered. So I think it's super great what you're doing. I'm really happy that you took time to be with us today on the show. And you cover the topic really, really well. We're excited to share this one and educate the audience that you are emerging.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate your guys' time.
Thank you.
Anytime. You're welcome back too. As you release features or things start to roll, we'll be happy to bring you back on too. So, thanks everybody for tuning into the live broadcast. We're going to end the live section here. And as you all know, we produce the same night. So this will be live in podcast land in a couple hours.